Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this community conversation. My name is Miles Owen. I'm the president of the Graduate and Professional Student Assembly. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this important event where your voices can continue a long-standing conversation about how we can all support each other on this campus and develop new ideas to further improve our institution. This year, GAPSA and the Undergraduate Assembly has made it a priority to engage with all students in order to advocate for and give voice to the anxieties they are feeling. I know that students are worried about stresses in their everyday lives, the headlines that never seem to stop or get any better, structural systems that throw up barriers when they should be tearing down walls, and the many other things that affect our mental health and wellness, and which in this day and age can sometimes be too numerous to count. In times like these, our support networks of family, friends, and community are all vitally important. Hence, the goals of this conversation tonight are twofold: to find and cultivate personal strength, support, and resilience by engaging with others, and to develop solutions to further improve our entire community. For these reasons, I look forward to the conversations that will be occurring over the next 2 hours, and I look forward to working with President Gutman, Provost Pritchett, and all of you to follow up in these conversations with specific ideas to improve our community. It is now my pleasure to introduce President Amy Gutman, who will share some welcoming remarks. She will then be joined by Provost Pritchett and Michelle Chu, President of the Undergraduate Assembly, for the first conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miles, and let's thank Miles for all that he does, for his leadership and all he does as GAPSA president. Good evening and welcome. I'm really appreciative that we're all here together tonight. We have been profoundly affected, significantly shaken, significantly challenged by a vast number of current events, ranging from devastating natural disasters to repugnant anti-Muslim rhetoric, to the racism, anti-Semitism, and other abhorrent bigotry on display in Charlottesville, to political uncertainty and challenges to our DACA students and those who traveled to Penn from all around the world, and to tragic deaths of 4 Penn students in just the past 2 months. I am heartbroken by their loss, and I can't begin to fathom the hurt felt by their family and close friends. The most difficult thing I've ever had to do, perhaps in my entire life and certainly in my professional life, is to talk with Penn parents who have lost a son or a daughter. I hear, I see, I feel that we have been feeling emotionally raw, and we're coping in different ways, all of us striving to find the most meaningful path forward from here. Being here with you underscores our community, and it underscores the fact that our community is built on shared purpose, collective compassion, and great heart. All of you taking this time to be here for this event is a very important continuation of our work, especially now. Provost Pritchett and I, Wendell and I, are here for at least 2 reasons. First, because we are one community. When we feel anxious, when we feel saddened, afraid, grieving, it's easy to feel like we're alone. By coming together like this, we're reminded that we're not alone. You are not alone. Those who are challenged in grieving, and all of us are not alone. We will care for one another in every way we can. A second reason we wanted to gather everyone is to continue the process of strengthening and supporting our community. We've worked together, and we will continue to work together to build a stronger and more welcoming Penn. So in the face of threats and tragedies, many of us have spoken about the values that make our community thrive. And it's really worth underscoring those values, because those values are a touchstone for virtually everything we do, both individually as members of this Penn community and even more so what we can do together. Love, not hate. Inclusion, not exclusion. Compassion, not contempt. Empathy, not antipathy. Understanding, not ignorance. And the elevation, not the degradation of the human spirit and mind. Now tonight, we will discuss some of the things we can all do to advance these values, to take care of ourselves and to take care of others, and to foster resilience. In a universe of other options, community is choosing to be there for one another and to work together for each other. You've done that tonight. We want to continue to do that through our campaign for community. And I want to thank you all for joining us here today to continue this conversation and to move Penn forward. So thank you very, very much. And we're going to get started.
So I wanted to thank both of you for sitting down here to talk with me, and I also want to thank every one of you guys for coming to listen. President Gutman, Provost Pritchett, given everything that the campus has faced this semester, I want to ask both of you to touch upon your own experiences. Have you ever been faced with situations that were stressful but seemed beyond even your control, and how did you respond to those situations?
Okay, I'll start. So probably the hardest thing for me to talk about and think about was what happened when I was in high school, and when I was about at the end of my junior year, I lost my father, and it was sudden. I saw him die, and so when all of my friends were getting college acceptances, there were lots of parties, and when I got my college acceptances, I literally burst out crying because I thought first thing I would do was tell my father and mother, and there were only one of them. There was my mom, and she was grieving as I was. More than that, I knew that I had a choice. I could either stay the course and go to college, which was the dream of my mother and father for me, because neither of them could go to college, and we were low income. I was first generation, or I could, step back and rethink. I decided to go to college, but it meant leaving my mother alone. I had no siblings. She had no siblings. And it was very isolating. It was a very isolating experience. I didn't know anybody at college. I didn't know where to look for help either. I really didn't think I could talk to anybody about it, because in middle school I had been bullied, and I thought anything that made you different made you be bullied. So I waited a long time before I talked about it. And then I don't want this to be maudlin, so years later, when I was in college, I got therapy for something that I thought was totally unrelated. I knew I needed to break up in a relationship that was not a good relationship. And it turned out it was, when I went to the therapist, it was totally related. I mean, and if I had done it years before, it would have been better. And then fast forward, within a decade of that, I was the only woman in my department. It was my first job. Not my first job, I washed dishes in a camp and things like that, but it was my first professional job. I was the only woman, and I felt stronger then. I mean, I still felt isolated and an outsider, but I learned that you look for community. You look for people who can both support you in a cause. And so I became, it was like my mission to become a champion for women and underrepresented minorities, because there were even fewer underrepresented minorities than there were women.
Yeah. So as you were talking, I was thinking about the many similarities in the story I was going to relate. And my father's still around, but he has Alzheimer's, and he's had it for a long time. And so when we identified it, it was about 2003, and I was a relatively new, untenured professor here. And we were trying to figure out what was going wrong, and we were taking him to lots of doctors, all of whom were at Penn, and all of whom were wonderful. But it's very disorienting, and it's a disease that there is no cure, though we're trying to figure out, at least trying to make some progress on it. And again, I was relatively new teaching at Penn, and I had 2 young kids, and I was and am very fortunate that I have my wife, and we were partners in dealing with this, but it really did feel overwhelming. And as I reflect, as you were just talking, Amy, I was thinking how I had lots of support from lots of people, but I didn't really and I talked to a few of my colleagues in the law school about it, but I really worried about telling too many people, because I didn't want them to think that I was making excuses for, I was trying to finish a book that was going to get me tenure. And so again, it wasn't that I didn't tell anybody, but I didn't tell as many people as on reflection I could have, who I know would have been supportive. And another thing I was thinking about as you were talking is that, so we got through, we're at an equilibrium right now. It's not a pleasant one. My dad's in a nursing home, but he's still around. But about 3 or 4 years later, I got pretty sick. I got shingles, which is, it comes back when you had chickenpox. And I realized that actually the reason why I got sick was because I had been struggling and not taking care of myself enough. And luckily then I got more support to take care of myself. But as I reflect on it, I realized that I could have gotten more help from people who would have been willing to do it if I had talked to them. And so that's, among the lessons that I learned then.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, especially here at Penn, a lot of students face. They don't really talk about their struggles or, are open with it. I'm sure both of you have heard Penn Face. It's definitely really prevalent here, but it's really important to make sure that we foster a community here where we feel like it's okay to talk about the struggles.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned that, I think most of us learn it the hard way, and I hope we can help more people learn it the easy. There's no easy way, but an easier way. I just have so identified with students I've talked to who've lost there are now groups on this campus for students who've lost members of their family, and for students who are, targeted, for whether they're Muslim or Jewish, or, Black students, or, students who have, there's so many different issues. We all think we are unique, but I've learned that there's help, there are groups and individuals to help, and we have to communicate that better.
I think that's definitely important. Moving more towards your experiences here at Penn, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the biggest challenges you faced personally here at Penn, and kind of what you've learned from those experiences, but also what you learned from the Penn community in those experiences.
You want to go first on this one?
Okay, well, and actually it's related. I think there are a couple of related issues. So the first one I start with is just the challenge of work-life balance. because I think we're all pretty ambitious people here, and I think of myself as one too. But we also have family and friends to work to take care of and to support and celebrate. And so most of my experience here has been as a faculty member. I'm a relatively new administrator, so I think about how I interacted here as a faculty member, and that is a constant challenge. And again, I think talking to colleagues and friends about how do you balance the many ambitions that you have to be a great father and a great husband and also a great scholar, so as I think about that. For myself, that's probably been the thing that I've tried to work through here. But as I think about it myself as a teacher, I mean, that's what I've tried to help my students work through also, right? Because again, we're all ambitious people and we're trying to figure out how do we do many things and have an impact and support our friends. And so, I found as I've gotten older and wiser, hopefully, that trying to help my students think through those questions. And of course, being an African American professor in a place that we certainly have more under Amy's leadership than we used to, but we don't have, and certainly 15 years ago didn't have a lot, and so lots of African American students and other students of color would come to me, and would be particularly interested in talking about the challenges in those contexts. And I have found, again, getting back to community and talking to each other, that working together in groups. For example, I spent a lot of time with BALSA, the Black Law Students Association, and that together, in focusing on tasks that we not only would we feel better about the things that we were trying to improve, but we felt better about ourselves, because the best way to really feel well and supported is to be engaged in meaningful work with other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the two things that come to mind, there are two, you asked what the biggest challenges. So the two things since I've been Penn president that come to mind, very different, is one, the Great Recession. Yeah. So between 2008 and 2010, in 2 years, 9 million Americans lost their jobs. And among those were parents of Penn students. And there were faculty and staff and students, faculty and staff who wondered whether their jobs would be protected. And so having to make sure that faculty, staff, and students all were protected as best we could. I mean, it was it was incredibly disorienting and terrifying. In fact, there were many, many, many months where nobody knew whether the bottom would totally fall out of we would go from a Great Recession to a Great Depression. And so that was a huge challenge, and unlike some other institutions, we rallied and did not lay people off, and also made sure that we ramped up financial aid for our students. So that was a kind of challenge where I felt, while it was the external world on us, there was something we could really band together. And while we couldn't solve the world economy, we could really do well here. And we've continued on the financial aid is a continual challenge, because while the economy has recovered, it really, many, many families still find it challenging. And some of the similar things happen with DACA and with immigration and so on. The second one is very different. I don't think it will surprise you, but the single most challenging, hardest, most heartbreaking thing any university president can do is to talk to parents who have lost their children.
Right.
And there's nothing, I know that there's nothing I can do to bring a person back to this campus. It leaves every student death leaves mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, teammates, classmates, everybody bereft, and it's a gaping hole in our community. Speaking to the parents is difficult, but I'm always struck by how listening really makes a difference. Hearing the stories, relating what I know about the students, but more listening to the stories and seeing if there's anything we can do more to help is, it's a very small thing. Yeah. But it's sometimes the only thing you can do are small things, and that's as difficult as it gets.
And I think, President Gutman, you've touched on two of the most important issues that students face on campus, at least in my opinion. From my experience on the undergraduate assembly, I know we've really been focusing on cost of attendance at Penn and also just mental wellness here. I think with cost of attendance, I know we've already made strides this year with eliminating course fees and things like that. So continuing on those issues, I think, is super important. And I look forward to working with you on those in the future.
And making textbooks more available so students don't have to buy them, and getting ways of having more money for students, especially low and middle income students, and making Penn more affordable to everyone. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and Provost Pritchett, I kind of wanted to touch upon, sorry, your experience as a faculty member of Penn. From what I see, the interface between faculty and students is super important. Other than the role of being an educator, I know you talked about trying to connect with your students.
Yeah.
What do you see as, other than being an educator, what do you see the role of faculty is on campus and how they've been doing so far?
Yeah, well, so not all, but a lot of my experiences at the law school, which is a fairly small part of this institution, and we have lots of advantages that the university has, but we have about 1,000 students, or not even, and we're in one building, several buildings that are connected. And so there really is a pretty deep sense of community at the law school, and you see your students every day, right? And so I see them in class, but I also see them walking down the hall and see them in groups and at lunch. And so it's somewhat easier to build those connections, right? And so I have lots of students that, again, in addition to teaching, I talk to them about politics, I talk to them about, public service in Philadelphia. We worked on projects together, we worked on campaigns together, so we've gotten to be fairly close. I've even had the honor of marrying a couple of my students, which was a real blast. And so,
Officiating at the
Sorry.
I did that once. I once said to Reverend Will Gibson.
Yes.
So I was with Reverend Will Gibson and his grandson, and we were at the Penn Gospel Choir, and I hadn't met his grandson before, and I said, "Did you know that your grandfather married my daughter?" And he looked, and he said, "No."
You're exactly right.
And Will corrected me, officiating
at the marriage. You're exactly
I'll
right.
never make that mistake.
Thank you.
Nobody mistook it, but I had the embarrassing situation.
That is exactly right. So thank you for that qualification. But it's been really fun to get to know students at that level. And again, I think we have a lot of benefits at the law school because we see each other all the time. But I think that getting back to your question is that there are lots of communities within our community, and trying to build them out and trying to figure out how faculty and students can be connected at a really meaningful level. Again, not just in the classroom but outside of it, is really one of my main goals as provost. And I know the president agrees that it's really important. And so to get a little bit deeper, as I've talked to faculty in my job 4 months into it, I know that there are just tons of faculty who would like to be engaged at a deeper and more meaningful way with the students. And so we're working on lots of things in that area. With regard to challenges that students face, even things like just making sure that faculty are aware of all the resources that are available to students and to everybody. And I think that we've done a lot of work in that area, but there's more that we can do to make sure that we're tying it, we're connecting to each other in every way that we can to support each other.
So just really quick, last question. Okay. I know in your roles as president provost, I'm sure you've connected to people all across campus, whether that's students, faculty, staff, even alumni, in all the schools and at all levels. What do you see from your perspectives, and how would you characterize how the Penn community is doing right now?
So, I feel and hear and see in my, sitting down with students and staff and faculty and alumni, and but especially students and faculty and staff, that this is a very disorienting period. It's wrenchingly disorienting. It just goes on, whether it's students who are dying from cancer and accidents or suicide, or DACA being challenged, or immigration being challenged, or we have hundreds of students. I met freshmen just a convocation coming from Houston and Mexico, whether it's the natural disasters, earthquakes and hurricanes. There is nobody in our community, I think, who is immune from feeling this sense of disorientation, and it manifests itself in different ways: anxiety, depression, feeling that the community isn't doing enough. We need to do more, which I think is always the case. We always need to do more. And I think, for me, and I know Chaz Howard will be up here in a little bit, very shortly, but I do like Chaz Howard. For me, Penn is a beloved community, and I think you know when a community is a beloved community most when you're in times of adversity, and I think we are, and I think coming together as one is really important, not only in something like this, but in our day-to-day actions. And last week, Wendell and I were sitting down with some wonderful student leaders in a meeting, and one of the students, and everybody nodded when the student said this, said, it's really important for the community to hear from you, the two of you, but it's at least, if not more important, to have local conversations, to feel that in our daily lives there are places to turn. It was what you said. The Penn, how do you counter the Penn face? Well, you have to be able, it goes back to when I thought this, it just resonated with me because it goes back to so much of the challenges I've had that I have not felt that I could overcome on my own, except by just sucking it up, doing it. And that's just generally not the best way. So I think the best way of orienting ourselves through disorienting times, which don't have simple solutions, is to find ways of being together more and finding more ways of helping each other.
I think Amy captured it really well, so I'll just amplify a couple of things real briefly. I do think that this is a really disorienting period, and we have to come together to deal with that. And I think that we have a wonderful institution, and we have lots of parts of the institution that are serving students and others, and it's of course our job to continue to improve those programs, psychological services and our career planning and all of those kinds of services. That's certainly our job, and we can always get better, and we have wonderful people, we can always get better, so that's one thing. But I think even more importantly is, as Amy said, trying to figure out ways to tie all of these threads together so that everybody feels that they have many people to turn to. So again, the centers, but also faculty, also peers, and that everybody has several people that they feel like they can turn to anytime they feel disoriented. And I really think that's the biggest thing that we should be focused on, is trying to do that.
And hearing more from, one of the reasons we want to have this website where we get input is we have this mission. I articulated our values, but those are guiding stars, and then we have to find out from students and faculty and staff, everybody, we're a community of ideas, and not every idea can we do, but almost everything we've done, whether it's improving our financial aid or improving CAPS or bringing support for student groups, peer-to-peer counseling, and Thrive at Penn and iCares, and everything has come up through suggestions from either our community of students, faculty and staff, or through professionals and places like the JED Foundation and so on. Mm-hmm. So having more of that, I think, is a very, very positive. And I hear a lot from students as I spend time with student groups and go to athletic events and arts and performing arts events and arts and culture. it's a way of, I think we just need to make people feel more open in non-threatening ways, and that will actually help us move forward as a community.
And I look forward to talking with you guys more at the follow-up events that I know will ensue after this. But for now, I just want to thank both of you for sitting here and talking with me. I know we have panelists coming in soon, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you all. Thank you. We'll look forward to listening now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President Gutman, Provost Pritchett, and Michelle for sharing your thoughts. It is now my pleasure to introduce Michael Deli Carpini, Dean of the Annenberg School of Communication, who will introduce the second conversation.
So thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to be moderating this next conversation or discussion. We have four excellent panelists, conversants with us today. I could go on forever talking about their accomplishments, but instead I'm simply going to introduce them and let you know that they're really here for two different reasons. One is because in their own ways they bring some expertise to the issues that we've all been dealing with over the past several months, more than a few months, both personally here at the University of Pennsylvania, but also more generally in the world, if I can say that. But also because they're members of the community who are experiencing everything that you're experiencing, though again, in their own ways. And we thought it would be useful to hear from them, both in their roles as experts and in their roles as members of the community. They include Angela Duckworth, the Christopher H. Brown Distinguished Professor of Psychology in the School of Arts and Sciences, Jodie Foster, Chair of Psychiatry at the Pennsylvania Hospital and Clinical Professor of Psychiatry in the Perelman School of Medicine, Charles Howard, Chaz, our university chaplain, who I'm sure almost all of you know, and Maria Kendo, the Ruth Meltzer Professor and Chair of Psychiatry at the Perelman School of Medicine. So let me just ask them to come out onto the stage and we'll get the conversation going, hopefully a conversation that you all can then continue in the breakout sessions afterwards. So as I mentioned, you bring various types of expertise to this discussion, but you're also members of the community. So I thought I'd like to start off by just asking you at a personal level, how are you dealing with or seeing the stress of the current environment that we're in, for want of a better word, and how do you address that stress and try to deal with it? And I'd like to just make that an open question.
I generally spring into action. And I've decided to use my role as the director of the clinical operation to make sure that our Department of Psychiatry is as connected with CAPS and with the Penn Police as it can possibly be, just to make sure that when our students are having trouble, that there's a smooth connection and transition between our departments.
That's great. And do you feel that this is a stressful moment, more stressful than other points?
Every moment in time has its stresses,
Stress, yeah.
And everybody defines stress a little bit differently,
Right.
but this is certainly a doozy.
Yeah. Chaz?
Yeah, it's been I was telling my wife, I feel like I've shed more tears this semester than any other semester of my last 21 years here at Penn. And it's been hard. I think whether it's the challenges we've had on campus, saying goodbye to really loved classmates and students of ours, and, or dealing with tragedies that may not hit personally, natural disasters and such, but seeing how that has hit a lot of our students, it's been really hard. And the way I've survived it, I think, has been, and we'll say more about this later, I think, but seeing the way our communities come together, whether it's the vigils that we've had and just seeing arms around each other at a frat house, or the amazing fundraising efforts that students have done that have balanced out the grief really have brought hope at the same time. But I've also been personally thankful for like Penn Rec and our swimming pool where I jump in that water and blow off some steam and can kind of take a quick break in the middle of the day. But that's the self-care aspect of that. I'm so grateful for something I've taken for granted for so long.
So I think that stress is ubiquitous, and I think that in particular for me as someone who works with the faculty in psychiatry, I have the obligation, the opportunity, and the privilege to work with them when they lose a patient to suicide. And it's extremely painful for the doctor when that happens. And I try to make an effort to stay in touch with them, to talk with them, to debrief with them, to review, is there anything else we could have done? What are the things we could put in place to be more helpful even? And for me also, it's very personal because suicide runs in my family. So every time this happens, it's sort of a grim reminder of that. And I think that one of the things that people don't always realize is that suicide is not really a reaction to catastrophic stress alone. It's genetic, it runs in families, there are biological changes that we can see in people who attempt suicide or who die by suicide. And so for me personally, it means that my children are at risk. And talking with them, when they were late teenagers, they're now in their 20s, but when they were late teenagers, we sat around the dinner table talking about it and how having suicidal ideas is really not any different than having a fever. It means something's wrong. And it means that in rare cases it could kill you. And it's challenging because when the person gets into that frame of mind, it seems like the most logical thing to do. It seems like a really obvious way to address a problem, whether it's a rupture in a relationship or it's a problem with grades or just that they're suffering terribly. And that's why it's so important to talk about it as a medical condition, because that's what it is. It's a medical condition. And I think that a lot of times we're tempted to think about it as like, oh, it was the breakup in the relationship, or it was, academic stressors, or it was what have you. But I think that thinking about it as a medical emergency and talking with each other, because talking does save lives, and it does make a difference if you can talk to someone and then encourage them to get the kind of help that they need. And it's something that I carry with me, and in my work very hard to try to prevent these kinds of things from happening to other families.
Thanks. Angela?
I'm not teaching undergraduates this semester, but I think as I hope every faculty member does, the students who are in your life because they're working in your lab, or you taught them last semester, or in some cases a couple years ago. So I think the only thing that I am doing is trying to be more available. So when I get a text message that says, hey, do you have, a minute to talk? The answer absolutely has to be yes. I think it always has to be yes, but I think maybe now in these times it reminds you that, make time for whatever students are passing in and out of your lives. There's a continuum, of course, of stress and suffering, and since I'm not dealing with students in a clinical setting, I am not, getting, I think, the students who are undergoing the most stress and suffering. But I think it is also a reminder that all of the, that expression, be kind to all you meet, for each is carrying their own heavy burden, is true. And so, to be, as Amy said, compassionate.
So several of you have mentioned that there's always a certain amount of stress, and people can experience stress in different ways at different times. We never know what's going on in individual people's lives. But I can say personally that the stress that I feel in my life feels magnified by the larger stress, whether it's the series of natural disasters or the events in our political environment, or the deeply split public that we seem to have. The news seems to be a litany of new concerns and issues that can be, as President Gutman said, really disoriented. How do these larger kind of events that we're all experiencing connect to the way we experience and deal with stress as an individual and as a community? Is there a connection there? Is that something that just feels, is it really just a coincidence? Doesn't feel like a coincidence to me, I will say that. So, any thoughts on the relationship between these larger issues and the stress that it causes, and how it affects us as individuals and as community members of the community?
I mean, all I can say is that I think that stress is a very individual experience. You know, not unlike the way grief is a very individual experience. You know, when somebody passes away, there's an assumption of grief, but we don't know what my grief is versus your grief. And I think that by the same token, we each experience stress that is individual to us, but my stress may have nothing to do with your stress. And so I don't think generalizations can be made. I mean, obviously, these events are stressful.
Right.
But to the extent that it affects an individual is, I think, a custom answer, case by case.
Right. What about a larger community? Do you have thoughts, or any of you have thoughts on that?
So I think it's interesting because stressful events can have paradoxical effects. And I think that it does sensitize us to other stresses in general. I happened to live in New York City at the time of 9/11, and it was a horrifying experience for those of us who lived relatively close to the towers, for those of us who either lost family or friends or knew people who did. And the thing that was remarkable was to see the reaction of the city. A city that was known for being hard and callous and aggressive, all of a sudden felt very different. People came out of their apartments, of their apartment buildings, and stood on the street with candles, hugging each other, talking with each other. And I feel very strongly that maybe you could say that New York feels like a different place today because they invested in Times Square. Now it looks like Disney World. But I don't think it's really only that. I do think that that collective trauma of having more than 3,000 people die in one day in this terrible disaster really brought the community together. And so I think how we react as a community to coalesce, to support each other, to reach out. It was amazing to see people who ordinarily, I'm sure just the week before, would have walked by me and not said hello. All of a sudden were saying hello, they were smiling. People were being more courteous. It was really, really impactful.
It's an important question. The notion of sort of the backdrop, how that amplifies the small pain that each of us carry. One of the adjectives I heard a lot of people describe themselves as over the last year has been fragile, where in the case of many African Americans, seeing black bodies beaten and shot on repeat on social media, or being Muslim and having to bear the brunt of executive orders and Islamophobia, or being a woman after the Me Too campaign, or Latino after DACA, and just this kind of big backdrop here that feels dehumanizing. And so small little slights like being cut off in traffic or interrupted in class feel devastating because I'm being dehumanized and disrespected constantly in the media and on social media. So of course it feels like I'm on edge perpetually because you never know what might set me off right now because everything seems so big and devastating. And the worst part about it is a lot of times we're not aware of why I'm so on edge or why I feel fragile. And it's also a hard time to be around right now. It's tough.
I wanted to actually ask whether you, Chaz, had any insight, or any of the panelists, on how to get from fragility and a feeling of isolation to a feeling of strength and community, which are the two, I think, possible reactions, and they're not necessarily exclusive, but there is research by a sociologist named Alan Fisk who suggests that people have different ways of relating to each other, and in some ways we relate to each other like we do an economy, like you buy this and I sell it, and we're just different agents, and we're trying to get the best price and having fair contracts. But we actually switch into a different mode, a communal mode, where your suffering is my suffering and my bread is your bread. And we're capable of doing this and switching modalities it would seem like it would be a good thing in these times to switch to a communal mode where we feel part of one whole. And I don't have any insight about how you do get from, one way of experiencing the pain to another.
I love what you said there of moving from the kind of isolation to community and burden sharing. I think in a lot of ways that's the gift of our president and provost's vision for tonight. Is it feels like I'm the only one. A lot of us feel we're the only ones feeling the pain. But then to hear Dr. Gutman and Provost Pritchett say, this hurts us too. Or I remember when I was a student and I had to go to therapy, or I've had to deal with grief and loss too. It reminds us, wow, we're not the only ones who are feeling this. In fact, the leaders of our community are feeling this too. And their vulnerability allows us all to be vulnerable together, which I think is the blessing and grace of a gathering like this.
So Angela's question raises or is connected to a question of what should we be telling our students and other members of the community? How should they be addressing these issues? I'm, again, really moved by the notion that people experience stress differently. We're in a moment now where there are so many things going on that we are coming together because we sense a larger stress. But what that suggests is that there are times when maybe there isn't that larger stress, but people are experiencing stress in difficult ways all the time. How do we? What's our message to other members of the community? We're in very different positions, to students, to staff, to faculty, but especially to students. What should we be telling them that they should do? And I realize how hard a question that is, and I realize that it is individual, but even if it's how does one deal with it as an individual?
So I think that it's a super important question, right? Because we have all of these stresses buffeting our community, and the question is, how can we get to a better place? And I think that it is highly individual, and each person has to know what works for them. So you were talking, Charles, about swimming. For some people, it might be reaching out to friends and talking with people. For other people, I know for me, one of the things that's really helpful is to take a long walk. So I walk back and forth from work to my home, and people say, like, that's really far. It takes like 35 minutes if I'm walking fast, and I walk very fast. But to me, it really helps me sort of shift my mindset from my work mindset to my home mindset. Not that they're completely different, but it really helps just kind of lower the stress level a little bit, and I find it very, very useful. I also find it very useful to know when I talk with other people, oh, it's not just me. It's not just my family. For example, my parents were actually in Puerto Rico during the hurricane, and I was able to bring them out about a week later, and when my parents arrived, they had lost, I'd just seen them 2 months before, they're in their late 80s, they're quite elderly, they'd each lost between 10 and 15 pounds. I was horrified. And my mother couldn't even talk, she was just crying, she couldn't stop crying. And just spending time and connecting and helping them with distraction. This is another thing that I think people don't always understand. People feel like if I have a problem, I really need to think about it and figure it out. But sometimes the best thing you can do is to distract yourself. And distraction can be really useful. It might be going for a swim, or it might be going for a walk, or it might be going to the movies or listening to your favorite music. But sometimes that can also be a really helpful tool.
I would say that it's incredibly important to try to know yourself. So you know what works for you know what works for you, but some of us don't know what works for us. And it's incredibly important if you're feeling stress and you really don't know where to go with it. Dr. Okendo mentioned that sometimes people feel like suicide is the only answer because they can't think of other answers. But this is when you reach out for help. This is when you consider seeing somebody. And maybe when you untangle the spaghetti in your head when you're so upset, maybe that's when you figure out, what works. And the resistance to doing that is age-old and incredibly frustrating to us in psychiatry. In the past dozen or so years, I've lost 2/3 of my immediate family. And as I watched death after death after death, and my parents or my siblings, dealing with it very differently from the way I did, and they would say, well, I know why I'm depressed. Rafi died, Michael died. And so what? I mean, who cares? That's called intellectualization. It's a defense mechanism. It's not an answer. And it's really important to remember that there are resources, there is help, and we should utilize them. We should know ourselves when we need it.
That's a really interesting and important point. I mean, I know that I'm guilty of that I feel as if there's a reason why I feel depressed or stressful, then somehow that's enough. Because there's an objective reason that I can point to, then I'll be able to deal with it. But your point's really well taken, that oftentimes that's not enough. And you need to know when it's important to talk to other people who have some expertise. Chaz?
Jody's words about springing into action are kind of echoing in my head about what to do, and it's so much what I've seen the Penn community do in the last several months and several years, of whether it's let's respond to the devastation in Mexico and do an amazing fundraiser, or with the tragedy and hurricane damage in Puerto Rico. A lot of that has been so hopeful and so encouraging and cathartic, but also doing something about it. I'm so thankful for kind of the regular parts of chaplaincy. So a couple Fridays ago, over at Hillel, they had an interfaith, intercultural Shabbat service where students at Hillel, students from PRISM, our interfaith group, MSA, United Minorities Council, all gathered, broke bread, and just got together. A lot of that is in response to the hateful messages that are out there too. That was putting some legs on your faith, pulling the community together rather than hurting in isolation. We're going to come and be forward-looking together. Or after the tragedy that the guys in Sammy experienced here, they had a huge dinner at the house after the memorial service here. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful action of doing something and springing into action and pulling folks together in the name of love. And to me, I think that's a beautiful response to hurt and to pain.
So a lot of what we're talking about is the individual stress that is caused by a number of events that have taken place on campus. In the backdrop are these larger issues that are pretty widespread and pretty varied in their nature. But some of what I feel is happening, and I feel it on campus and I feel it in the larger society, is stress. Some of it is anger, some of it is disappointment, some of it is mistrust. How do these things fit together? Is there a connection between the stress that people are feeling as individuals or as a community and these other emotions that are bubbling that seem related and important to address as well? Do you see that, Chaz, in your job? Do you see it in the work that you all do, that there's more than just stress that we're really talking about when we have a conversation like this?
I had an old mentor who used to talk about humans as being complex. And in one sense, we have the ability to hold lots of different emotions almost at the same time. But it's an important question, too, of how stress intersects with our anxiety, intersects with our grief. And it's hard to sort of discern and distill all those different emotions in there. That's why I'm so thankful for folks like Bill and Mita and the team over at CAPS, or folks at EAP, or just the people I go to in life to sort me out, whether it's my mentor Will Gibson, or grabbing coffee with Mo Rush and just sort of laying it all out there, because it is all connected. And that's scary. I think I'd rather be, I've been called simple before, but I'd rather be simple. But there's so much pouring into it that makes it difficult.
I think it also goes back to Jody's point, which is that we all react to stress so differently. And it is true that some people react to it by feeling more anxious, and some people feel more depressed, and some people feel really angry. And I think knowing yourself, knowing how you react, trying to manage your emotions, because I think a lot of times also the emotions feel like they have a life of their own and like we can't manage them. And learning to manage them and regulate them is a very important life skill, but it's something that you can develop. Like, even if you don't have it now, it doesn't mean you can't learn to do it. It's a teachable skill. And I think that those are the kinds of things that in the psychological services you could learn to do if those are the kinds of things that happen when you feel really stressed out, that your feelings seem to overwhelm you, whether it's anger or anxiety or sadness or suicidal thoughts.
There's a graph I like to show my undergraduates, and it's emotional stability over the life course, and it gets better. I'm like, see here, like you're, just developmentally, given your period of life and also given your hormones and given your brain development, you are at the nadir of emotional stability. And I think a lot of things change over the life course, but including them, the skill of perspective taking and selective use of distraction in strategic ways, and a lot of things that I think you can accelerate by going to therapy, which is why, I really resonated when Amy said, there are no easy ways, but we can make it easier. We can make that natural maturity, as it were, faster. And I do think it takes maybe a bit of paradigm shifting. I mean, I grew up in a family where it definitely was not a good thing to go to therapy or see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. It really is a shameful kind of thing. And so it took me until like middle adulthood to figure out it's the best thing ever. And I wish I had actually been a young person when I was 18. Somebody could have, had a panel like this and like, yeah, you should do it. It's awesome. It's just like fast forwarding some of the skill building that you don't want to take a decade to figure out.
And I think it's really important, give attention and voice to the feelings you have. They're information. They're telling you about yourself. They're telling you who you are and how you behave. And yeah, we grow out of things. My mother spent a lifetime saying to me, this too shall pass, this too shall pass, this too shall pass. And everything passed.
So we've been talking a lot about how to deal with stress in our own personal lives, or the stress that our students, fellow staff members and faculty members may be feeling. But as we've said repeatedly, everyone experiences stress in a different way. What should we do to, when we think we see stress in our colleagues, with our fellow students? And stress can be at different levels, but especially stress that we feel is concerning. How do we know? I mean, I think there's a tendency for people to say, it's not my business. What should we be doing as a community when we see it in others?
I think it's a real turnoff to come up to someone and say, you look stressed.
Yeah.
I think it's aggressive. But I think it's okay to say, we all seem so stressed. I mean, to normalize it, to globalize. And this is, again, a way to build the community that we're talking about. It's all about, how you deliver this message. And, I might say something like that in that aggressive way when, in fact, I'm projecting the way that I'm feeling.
Right, yeah.
And so make it a group thing.
I think the other thing too is that you can ask people how they're doing. And a lot of times, people have very different ways of showing their feelings. I could have never been a psychoanalyst because you could read my face like perfectly. And a lot of people are like me, right? You can look at them and you can see, wow, this person's really hurting. And saying, hey, how are you? What's going on with you? And inviting them to talk with you. They don't have to talk with you, but it's always really, I always find it very just moving when people ask me how I'm doing in a concerned way, not just, hey, how are you? Really wanting to know.
I think I would just add having courage and vulnerability. I think, so much of what John Jackson has been working on lately has been around courageous conversations, particularly around race. But I think that translates also to having courageous conversations around stress. And so particularly in student groups or departments on campus, having the courage to bring it up. How are we doing as a performing arts group, as a chapter house, as whatever, and let's just really, really see how we're all doing there. Or having the courage to say, hey, you ever think about going to CAPS or going to talk to somebody? And I'm happy to walk you over there. The other aspect around vulnerability, though, this whole notion of pen face, and it's something we've talked about for a long time on campus, that transcends students. I think that also goes to faculty and staff who often don't reveal their own stressors in a department, particularly during tenure seasons or whatever is going on there. But to have the vulnerability to say, I'm not doing well. I bombed that last exam. Or I'm upset about my playing time. Or I mean, just to be real with each other. Because when one person's real, it's contagious. Other people then become real. And then we can share how we also are in therapy. Or I had a good experience talking to somebody in my life, and CAPS has been great for me. Being vulnerable allows others to be vulnerable too, I think, like we've seen tonight.
So last question, and a question that I hope will end us in a more optimistic place. What gives you hope? What is it that you, when you look at the times that we're in right now as a university, as a community here, all the way through the community of the nation and the world, what do you see that gives you hope in the midst of what seems like a pretty trying time politically, socially, culturally?
Well, I would go back to my New York City example. I think that what gives me the most hope is how strong communities can be in the face of adversity and how adaptable we are as human beings. That things that we think we would never be able to tolerate, sometimes we learn to tolerate them and we can deal with them and live with them. And that, I think, is a really important thing to remember, that we get used to lots of things, and that's a sign of strength. And it doesn't mean that you have to accept what's going on or that you shouldn't work to change it or to make it different, but we can tolerate difficult things, and communities can tolerate difficult things and grow and be better.
One of the most important research studies that was ever done on depression was done here at University of Pennsylvania 50 years ago, I think almost to the day, and that was the studies of learned helplessness that my doctoral advisor, Marty Seligman, did with others. And in the update on that research, which has been now its silver anniversary, there's so much now being learned about the human mind and brain is incredibly resilient, and we actually have at our disposal some cognitive things that no other species on the planet does. We can go to therapy and reframe experience. We can listen to other people share their stories and benefit from them. So I think there's a lot of hope in that. In the last 50 years, so much has been discovered, really, about how resilient we can be, even if we are also feeling fragile and isolated. And that I think there are so many ways in which human beings are just the most resilient species on the planet. And we truly do get stronger when adversity doesn't kill us.
I think the balance of generosity in the face of pain, I think, is what gives me so much hope now, particularly here on campus. And, I have images of, after the first executive order came out, some of the people who spoke at the kind of vigil we had in front of the Love statue were not just Patty, our Muslim campus minister, but Rabbi Mike and Rabbi Josh. Father Carlos were there. Or after the defacing in the Jewish cemetery, some of the other folks who went to clean it up were our Muslim students, our black students. Or after the losses in our Greek community, dozens of chapter houses are coming together, reaching out to Sammy and the Betas and SDT and caring for them. That gives me hope. Or when we're late night at the house and Val Cade, our vice provost, is there holding a crying student. Or seeing Dr. Gutman hug a crying mom. It's such a painful season on campus and in our country. Yet, I'm not sure I've ever seen a more generous, loving season on our campus at the same time. And that gives me hope, that there's a lot of pain, but there's more love maybe than ever here on campus.
There seems to be an endless supply, and particularly here, which I learned on the task force that I did with you, there's an endless supply of people who care.
Yeah, I think that
When
really
you think,
does.
when you think it's not there, all of a sudden you find out that there's 50 groups, doing just this thing that you think the place needs.
I think that, for me, that's what it is as well. It's not simply, though it's important, resilience, and it's not simply coping, it's seeing a side of the communities that we're part of that rise above the occasion, that really show you something that you didn't even know was there sometimes. So we could continue this for quite some time, but I know we want to leave time for folks to break into the smaller groups, and I think Wendell has some remarks that he wants to make. So please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you, Michael and Angela and Jody and Maria and Chaz. Really do appreciate it. So we're now going to move to the third and, in my view, most important part of our conversations tonight. We want to invite people to have some opportunity to talk to each other about both what you're struggling with and what you think we should do. And let me just say a couple of things before we start that process. So I hope I speak for everyone in the room when I say I feel fortunate and proud to be part of this community. This community is all of us, all of you, and you make this place what it is. And again, want to thank you all for coming. And I think I hope of all the themes that we heard tonight that none of us are alone. We are a community, and nobody should feel alone, and everybody should feel that you are valued here, and please, you should be reaching out to us and to your colleagues to make sure that we are helping each other. So I just want to say a couple of things about follow-up. So we are going to be gathering reflections from this evening, and I would ask that you use either the comment space on your program or the web form on the Campaign for Community website. And we're going to be reviewing the reflections, and President Gutman and I will be sharing some thoughts as follow-up. And then we're also going to be continuing these conversations after tonight in many different forums across the campus, in college houses, cultural centers, fraternities and sororities, and no doubt the classroom. And so I really look forward to hearing your thoughts in those contexts too. So we're now going to move to the third and final session. Do understand that some people, a few people might feel a need to leave, but I hope that you will stay. And I'm going to invite my colleague David Fox up to give you some directions about how we're going to have the third part of our conversation. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Provost Pritchett. So first, let me say, for those of you who do need to leave, you may do so now, but I hope you will actually consider submitting either on the back of this program where you have a space to write, or going to the Provost website where you can find a submission file, your thoughts so that you can help, excuse me, be part of the conversation. For those of you who are able to stay, I want to say that the small group discussions will give everyone here a chance to present a voice, give their ideas, and share this in campus. We hope, please, that you'll consider respecting and trusting the folks who are giving each other this space to talk, that you won't record the conversations, and that you will also not share specific things that are said with other students. Having said that, we're now going to start sorting the groups. You will be sorted into groups by letter, and you will find the letter if you go to your program. Under the program section, look at the second to last paragraph. Mine says Group I. Yours will give another letter. So open your program and take a look. So first, I'm going to ask the facilitators who are taking part in Group A to stand and raise your hands, please. Now, all participants who are in Group A, could you please follow the facilitators out into the lobby? We're going to do this for each of the groups. So let's start with Group A. Group B. Okay, can I ask the facilitators in Group B to please stand and raise your hands? All right, thank you, Group B facilitators. Members of the Group B, of the B groups, please stand up and also follow your facilitators out into the lobby. Group C facilitators, could you stand and raise your hands, please? Thank you. Group C participants, please follow them into the lobby. We're getting there. 2 more groups to go. All right. Group D facilitators, please stand and raise your hands. Very good. Group D participants, could you follow them into the lobby? I believe if we did this right, this means that all the rest of you are Group E. Facilitators, can you stand and raise your hands, please? Very good. Participants who are on Group E, please follow these facilitators out into the lobby. If you are not part of these groups, come find me or come find Rob Nelson. Are you here, Rob? Come find me and we'll figure something out. Thank you all for coming.